following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back, in case you're wondering, with George Case. I'm Ralph Tycho with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and George is going to go one-on-one with a terrific guest. Introduce him, George, and have a great time.
Okay, Ralph, thank you very much. It's my pleasure. Alan and I have been on quite a few podcasts together talking about baseball history, and Alan is a tremendous authority and has almost an encyclopedic knowledge of baseball history. And I just thought this would be a good opportunity for Alan and I to talk a little bit about the state of the game and where we are and where we're going, and also to discuss a little bit about our mutual background with SABR, which is the Society for American Baseball Research. Alan has been a long-time member, and I was the executive director of SABR for a couple of years. So we have that in common. The one thing that I'd like to start with, Alan, if you would, talk a little bit about your initial interest in baseball, where it came from when you were a youngster, and I know you were in New York, and then we'll get into the Pittsburgh area a little while, but if you would, bring us all up to date on how you really got so actively involved in the interest in our game of baseball.
Well, it's funny because neither of my parents cared about it at all, and when I was 8 years old in 1951, I started buying cards. In fact, one of the crazy stories is that we moved to Queens in June from the Bronx in 1951. And my grandparents came out, my mother's parents. My grandfather gave me $50. And just as soon as he gave me the $50, I went down 2 blocks by myself to the candy store and spent it all on baseball cards. And my mother was extremely unhappy about that, to say the least. But that's when I discovered it.
I can imagine, Alan. I know that from experience. I mean, I was sort of, a little bit lucky because my mother didn't get rid of them. But I know a lot of mothers, they found them in shoe boxes, threw them away, and said, "What are you doing with all this crap?"
Every year that I bought cards, I had to get rid of the previous years, which was painful. Of course, this is. Back in those days, this was not uncommon. Nobody, figured that they'd be worth any more than the cardboard that they were printed on. So then that's how I got involved. I started watching. The first time I ever watched it, basically, was the 1951 World Series. And I was aware of it before. I listened. We were over at my grandparents' house the last Sunday of the regular season that year, and I listened to the Dodger-Philly game, which the Dodgers won in 14 innings to, get the tie and start the 3-game playoff. And I was very aware of the Bobby Thompson game, but I didn't get home in time to see any of that. So I watched some of the World Series, and I was rooting for the Yankees, basically because I got early cards of Yogi Berra. And I said to myself, who the heck is this guy? And I found out, and very quickly, where I lived in Queens, in Belrose, which is near the Nassau County border, there were no kids my age who were born in Queens. Everybody was either from the Bronx or from Brooklyn. So we were primary Yankee and Dodger fans, and we used to argue all the time about the relative merits of those teams. So in 1952, which was an incredible season, an incredible World Series that they won with the Dodgers, Yankees being the Dodgers the last 2 games in Ebbets Field. And I still kept buying the cards. In fact, Topps in 52 put out that big issue for the first time. And I didn't know Topps from Bowman or anything, so I called them big cards and little cards. And it just went on like that. The cards would come out March 15th. They didn't shoot them the way they do it now, where they shoot it in December and then they issue during the season they issue a update set with players who in their new uniforms. So basically it went on and on like that. March 15th was always a big day, and got together with a group of kids and we traded. Got him, need him. And as I told Ralph yesterday, if I had 2 Mickey Mantles and you had 2 Joe Blows, and I needed Joe Blow and you needed Mickey Mantle, I would trade. It would be a trade.
Now, Alan, did you guys? We used to trade them too, but did you guys used to? I mean, living in the city, I don't know because I was living in the suburbs. But we used to put them in the spokes of our bikes.
No, I never did that.
Okay.
Okay, I told Ralph yesterday there's a man named Frank Barning who used to put out a collector's publication. He has a site called Friends Who Like Baseball, and he put up a picture of a bicycle with a damaged Frank Robinson card, with the in the spokes, held put up by a clothespin, and he captured that as American tragedy.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that could be considered that because, as you know, the value of the cards today is just, crazy. And some of the things, because they're so rare, they were either thrown out or damaged or whatever, waterlogged. And it's very rare, as you know, to find a card in a pristine condition. And some of them are extremely valuable.
I know, especially if they're the first or the last, because we put rubber bands around them.
Right.
So the Pafko card in the 52 top set, which is number 1, very, very hard to find in the real ones because, they reprinted the set in 1983, but the real ones are very hard to find in any sort of decent condition. And
you mentioned...
Yeah,
Alan, you mentioned about reprints. I know that somebody sent me a couple of my dad's cards, and they were reprints from, I think in the 80s. But they were reprints of play balls or whatever it was from the 40s because during, as you know, the war years, there weren't any baseball cards manufactured because of rationing. So cardboard was something that they didn't use for baseball cards, and I think it began again in around 46 or 47 when they started to issue cards again.
Yeah, well, Topps after 1956 and first time in 1957, they lowered the dimensions of the card. They shrunk the size of the card to what has been in, which is still in effect today. So when they issued Topps issued their reprints of 52, 53, and 54, they shrunk. The cards came in with the 1957 dimensions. So there's no way possible you could try to pass one off as the real thing. Because they're small.
Now, what about, Alan, what about some of these things I've seen lately? And I'm not a card collector. I have all my dad's cards. But I know somebody was trying to shave or reduce the size of certain cards, whether it be the Honus Wagner, T206 or whatever it was. I mean, I don't know, but there's been some scandals, I think, involved.
Yeah, well, I was telling Ralph yesterday, one of the things that happened when any kid from the 50s who did collect, bought this stuff, could tell you is that when Topps and Bowman were fighting their wars, which lasted until Topps bought Bowman out after 1955, there was a war on having certain players. And in 1954 and 55, there were no Topps Mickey Mantles. And up here in New York, God knows how many dimes or quarters were spent by kids trying to find 54 and 55 Topps Mickey Mantles, which never were. And now there are a number of people that put out custom cards to make up for a number of superstar cards that were never put out. So that there's a whole bunch of Topps style 54 and 55 mantles, but of course they're also the size of the cards are currently, and you can't sell them. In fact, I just bought a number of 50s Bowman custom cards for Jackie Robinson because he was never on a Bowman card after 1950. So you learn all this And
now, Alan, let me ask you, because you're really an expert on this. I'm not. But did certain players sign with either Topps or Bowman, and they wouldn't sign with the other card? In other words, they couldn't publish the other card?
That happened a lot. That's why, because Topps was beating Bowman in sales after 55, and Topps was able to buy Bowman out, and Topps basically had a monopoly from 1956 through 1981, I think it was. But there were wars as to who got what, and there were a number of players like Ted Williams. Players were getting paid, I think, $100 a year plus a set of cards for their for their rights. And then in 1954, Ted Williams signed a 5-year deal with Topps, where he's paid the magnificent sum of $400 a year for them. And then Bowman had issued a 54 Topps card, 54 Bowman card that they had to pull because of the exclusive deal with Topps. So those are very few and far between. They're worth an awful lot of money. And Musial was on Bowman in 48 and 49. He was on Bowman in 52 and 53, and he wouldn't go on to a mainstream card until he signed with Topps in 1958. So who knows why? But these players had a lot of reason. And of course, they get paid a ton of money for their rights now because that was part of the deal when Marvin Miller took over the Players Union. He realized that the players were paid
Alan, do the card companies today? I mean, there's so many cards. I have no idea. I just see a.
Well, Topps is the only one that does baseball.
Who the companies are. Yeah, but do they get the rights to that player like in the old days? In other words, for instance, I'm thinking about a Bryce Harper. He now is such a hot commodity. Are the card companies after him to do a card?
What happened? One of the things that Topps started doing, and Ralph was, a representative of Topps, and can tell you this.
Right.
And they started signing all the minor leaguers because they ran into a problem with Maury Wills. They wouldn't sign him when he was in the Pacific Coast League, playing in Spokane, and finally, the first card that they were able to put out on Maury Wills was in 1967 after he'd been traded to Pittsburgh. So they decided because of that they wouldn't want a situation like that to happen again, and they signed every minor leaguer. And I think once they get to the majors, what they get paid for their rights for their pitchers now is a hell of a lot more than they were getting paid when Marvin Miller took over the union.
Right. So a guy comes up from the minors, and he had signed a contract with a card company.
Yeah, with Topps.
Is there something that's specified then how much that he does make once his likeness is used on a card as a major league?
It's part of the union negotiations now.
Okay.
And Topps basically is the baseball exclusive. There's a company named Panini that does football, and there's somebody else that does basketball.
Okay, I'm asking you this because I had Panini called me, and they said that they wanted to use my dad's they were issuing some kind of a Legends of the Game or something, and they wanted to get a couple poses from, and they paid me a certain amount of money, but I was just thinking whether or not that had anything to do with retired players or whether they were going after.
As far as I understand, that the Major League Players Union just has the rights to the all current players.
Okay.
Okay, and a lot of the cards that feature older players, even going back to Ruth and Cobb, are custom made.
Okay.
And Topps can do that. They put out cards like that have the design from the 30s and 20s and teens.
Right.
And you're right. There were no after Play Ball had a 72 card series in 1941. I think your dad is in that.
Yeah,
and,
he is. Yes.
That was it until those were the last baseball cards produced in mass until 1948.
Right. Okay.
Tops.
Now, there was a company, and I've seen them. As a matter of fact, somebody sent me one, but it was a company, and I don't mean to dominate this about just baseball cards because we got a lot of things to talk about, but there also was a company called Exhibit, I think.
Yeah.
And they were sold in vending machines.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
You remember that?
Yeah, oh, yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
but the problem with that, it was open-ended because you never knew how many were in a set.
Okay.
Okay, so that made it very, very tough. And there was a company called TCMA that did minor league sets for years, and they printed play balls with a play ball looked like play ball cards from 1942 to 1946 to fill the gap in.
Okay.
Okay, but those are not real. Those are real play ball cards. They're custom made. Right. And somebody also a bunch of years ago put out a custom made Bowman 1947 set that I never see that advertised. I bought one because I knew when it came out that they would be short printed. So I bought one, and I haven't seen those on eBay being sold on eBay.
Now, Alan, do you still buy cards? I mean,
no.
Not as a kid, but I mean as a collector. So do you go to card shows and that kind of thing?
I used to, but I have a lot of reprints because the stuff I'm interested in it was basically in the 50s.
Right.
The real ones are just too expensive.
Right. Okay. Because I know some of the prices are astronomical. I mean,
I
just happen to look on.
Forget it. The average high number in the 52 top set. This is not Mantle or Matthews or Campanella or Robinson, which are out of sight price-wise. The basic card is $150.
Wow. This
is for the commons, what they call commons.
Right.
The whole thing is just completely out, and one of the mantles, 52 mantles, sold for I think $1 million several months ago.
Well, that is amazing. I think there is the publicity that's been out there about that Honus Wagner card is over $2 million or some crazy number like that. I mean, for a piece of cardboard, but people, I guess, are willing to do it. And I'm just curious as to who sets these prices, though. I mean, it used to be the law.
It's like anything else. It's supply and demand.
Right. I was just going to say supply and demand, right? Yeah.
Yeah, there was a crazy story that happened to a friend of mine a couple of months ago. He was 3 cards short of the 1952 top set, and they were all high numbers. So he gives me the card number. I give him the name, and the first 2 were he's pretty well off. He could afford this. The first 2 were they were all common cards, and the first 2 were reasonably priced, so he was able to get those. The third card was a Pirate player who only played in 1952 named Tony Barderome. So I told him, look on eBay. So he looks on eBay, says he can't believe the prices. And so I looked at eBay and I said, my God, you're right. This is so out of whack. It's unbelievable. So I Googled that. Apparently what happened was one of his relatives in 2015 decided to buy up all those cards for the family. So they became extremely scarce.
Right.
So he walked out. He knew a big time auctioneer who got him the card for a reasonable price. But I couldn't believe it.
That is amazing. I mean,
it's an amazing story. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I can understand. I mean, I've got, for instance, I have cards of my dad And they're not. I mean, they're a lot of money, I guess, relatively speaking. But I mean, I'm saving them for my children or grandchildren. I mean, I'm not trying to create any kind of scarcity. Yeah. But whenever I see a price of my dad's cards on eBay, I said, "Oh my Lord! I mean, where'd that price come from?" Because when I had them, I mean, they were just my dad's cards. They were personal with something for me. I just can't imagine somebody spending $100, $150 or $200 for a Gaudi or Goaty or whatever they call them. I mean, that just is.
They do it. These people have money. They're into it. They do it. There's some guy. I got this magazine, Sports Collectors Digest. There's some guy who I made friends with on Facebook who has his mother never threw them out. My friend in Ohio, who I was just talking about, his mother never threw them out.
Right.
So that was it. And of course, when I went off to college, when I was 17, 18 years old, you stopped buying them because you consider it a kid's hobby, and you were past that.
Right. Well, now, you know what? That leads us into the next part of this discussion. You mentioned college. You and I were in college at about the same time. I went to Rutgers. You went to Pitt. And I'm just curious. I mean, I know why I went to Rutgers, but I'm curious as to how you decided on Pitt from
basically,
living in New York City, and all of a sudden you're going to go out there to Pittsburgh.
Well, basically, I didn't want to stay home. That's one. My home situation was not very good, which I don't want to go into any further.
Right.
So I had to get to a college that was around in a big city because I needed that. I couldn't go out to someplace like Penn State, which is in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
And I started rooting for the Pirates in 1958 because I bet a friend of mine $2 that they would finish ahead of the Giants that year. So I started rooting for them, and then I found I could get their games on the radio late at night on a station out of Wheeling, West Virginia. So I started listening between watching the Yankees because the Dodgers and Giants had left by then. And I started following them, and in the spring of 1960, I got a little caught up, so I applied to Pitt. My father, because I knew Ballfield was 2 blocks from the university.
Right.
So my father wanted to go out there, so I picked the weekend where the Pirates were out in California, so I wouldn't have any temptation. So I went there. My parents agreed to let me go there, and I went there, and the ballpark was 2 blocks away and get in for $1. I mean, how could you beat that in left field bleachers? So when my
I know, and you know, Alan, I used to work in Pittsburgh, and I'm very familiar with that area. And I think, I knew kids who went to Pitt, but didn't the Cathedral of Learning, didn't that look down on Forbes Field?
Yeah, you had to go up a lot of floors.
Yeah, right. Okay, but I mean, it was because Forbes Field was adjacent. Right, it was adjacent
I did that a
to
couple
Oakland.
of times for steel football games.
Right.
But so and then you meet people who have the same thing, and me and a friend of mine and I snuck into Forbes Field at the top of the ninth inning of Game 7 of the 1960 World Series. We snuck in because the guards, the security, were busy watching the ball game. So we're in the bleachers, we're down on our knees, and saw the Mazeroski home run. So. Right. The last part of the top of the ninth, maybe if that game had gone longer, we would have gotten into deep trouble. But it was amazing we could do that. And then basically, for the next several years, as long as I was there, I went to almost every night game.
Well, I know you've become a huge Pirates fan.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think it's, the Pirates fans have all been, raving about the players that have been there. I mean, they had some great teams. But I'm curious as to your reaction to Mazeroski and the Hall of Fame. A lot of people have said, well, he got elected to the Hall of Fame because of the home run. Now, I don't think you agree with that. I think
no, I don't. He was considered the best fielding second baseman of his era. First of all, I think that the Hall of Fame has been cheapened quite a bit in the last bunch of years with some of the people they put in. Well, that all started with Frankie Frisch, and to a lesser extent Charlie Gehringer. But if they put in people like Ozzie Smith and Louis Aparicio, if you want to go back to antiquity, Rabbit Marinville and Bobby Wallace, these guys are not exactly Babe Ruth at the plate.
Right.
And Mazeroski's power was hurt by playing the bulk of his career in Forbes Field because he hit two-thirds of his career home runs on the road. I have no problem with that. Harold Baines I have a problem with.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have a problem with that, which just happened. The fact is that he got in there, and then you have guys like Hodges that are still sitting on the outside.
And Manny Minoso was somebody.
And Minoso, right? Yeah.
But
let me ask you this: what about the other great players in Pittsburgh that you saw? I mean, you saw
a lot of Clemente,
Stargell and Clemente and all those guys.
Stargell, a lot of Dick Grote, who I interviewed 24 years ago when he came in to do a basketball game, and I had a connection that I was able to use to get an interview with him. And pitcher was Vernon Law, Elroy Face. I mean, they didn't have really, outside of Clemente and Stargell, they didn't have any real solid Hall of Famers. They had a lot of players that were very good, and they had pitchers who didn't strike out many, but they didn't walk many either.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that because, as I've told you before, Mickey Vernon, he wore number 42, and Mickey was activated by Danny Murtaugh for the 60 series.
I know they were lifelong friends.
Given a 4-decade, but Mickey always maintained that Murtaugh really had a great feel for pitching and when to, make a change and stay with a guy and all that kind of stuff. So I think
Murtaugh, because he won 2 World Series in the time he managed, that he should be considered for the Hall of Fame. I really think.
A guy like Danny Murtaugh. I mean, I happen to know Danny's son, Tim. Matter of fact, Tim and I spoke at Mickey Vernon's memorial service back in 2008. And Tim was telling some funny stories about Mickey and Danny when they were kids, because they were childhood friends. They're growing up in Chester, Pennsylvania. And,
I know that. Yeah.
Yeah, and so when Mickey had an opportunity to get the 4-decade qualification, Danny activated him into the status of a player coach. He couldn't play during the series, but he did get a couple games in, and that qualified him for that same honor, a similar honor that Minoso had. So the fact is that I think Danny Murtaugh is overlooked, just like a lot of people, but I happen to think I agree with you. He got an awful lot out of his teams and had very good success when you're talking about
every player,
2 World Series champions, right?
When I talked to Dick Grote for that interview, I mentioned Murtaugh, and he said, he thought he was terrific, and I said to him, one of the questions I asked him, because they got clobbered in the second and third games of the 1960 World Series. They lost 16-3 in Game 2 and 10-0 in Game 3. So I said, what did Murtaugh have to say to you guys after that? And he said he was very calm. He says, we're down 2 games to 1. He said, all you have to do is have one more run at the end. So they won the next 2 games. They got
I mean, that's a key, I think, Alan. A lot of managers, I think they overmanage, and there's a guy like Danny who's very quiet. I think he had a nickname, the Smiling Irishman or something like that. I mean, he was a terrific handler of players, knew how to push the right buttons, and there's guys that, on the other hand, I mean, they're accused today of overmanaging. They're trying to overthink the game, and I don't particularly agree with that. I think there's too much that goes on, and the game itself has changed so much. I'm sort of turned off by Major League Baseball today because of all the stuff that's going on.
It's because Joe Girardi, who managed the Yankees up to last season for 10 years, he used to walk around with this it seemed like a 1,000-pound notebook. So I started calling him Notebook Joe. And because all these managers, I mean, Casey Stengel never was spent half the time looking things up as to who did what against who. And most of the managers today don't have an instinctive feeling for the game, the way the old-time managers did.
Well, that's what I feel, Alan, and I think you're right. I mean, we've talked before, all the new computer stuff, the analytics, launch angles and spin velocities and all this stuff. I mean, to me, it's just, somebody is making a lot of, moves maybe because of the computer, but on the other hand, I see a lack of fundamentals. I see a lack of good baseball sense in so many games. And I'm just saying, stop reading the doggone computer printouts. Look and see what's going on in the field. That's my opinion.
It's also a product of overexpansion, because you've got guys, even if they get cut, who are marginal players, even if they get cut from Team A, Team B will get somebody will get hurt on Team B, and they'll take this guy who was just cut by Team A. So there's no solid core of players that, like the old Brooklyn Dodgers had. You can you could depend on being there for year after year.
Right.
I think that's a big thing, and I think it's also they rush people to the majors. Of course, if they're any good, then they'll send them back to the minors for a month, so they can get another year of of control.
Right.
But it's the whole thing is to me it's not the same. And I told people, because one of my friends refuses to go to any game where there's a DH. He hates it so much, and it's a choice of either follow it or don't follow it. I don't follow it a lot as much as I did because the seasons are so long, and if you wind up winning the division, all you get is a bye in the playoffs.
Right.
It used to be if you had to win the pennant. I mean, even up to the point where it wasn't too bad when you had the 6-team divisions, because they tried. One guy posted on a Facebook site I'm on, thinking that they should bring back the split seasons. Well, they tried that in 1892. The first year the National League was 12 teams, and they tried that in 1981 after the strike. It was a disaster both times.
Right.
Because if you give the team that won the first half, saying they don't have to play the second half, they won't. They'll just, wander through the second half of the season. That's what happened to the Yankees here in 1981.
Right.
So the split season is ridiculous, but there's an awful lot of factors going into the way today's game is played. And one of the things when I was doing trivia, writing the trivia, I wrote the trivia for the National for a few years, National Saber Convention, and somebody asked me, why don't you put in any LCS and League Division League Championship Series questions in there? And I said, it's very simple. Nobody cares.
Well, you know what? The people that do care, and that lead me into our next topic with Saber. Saber has so many people who really care about certain aspects of the game, the analytic part of it, which it's never been something that I've really gotten into. I was always liked more of the history of it. But the analytics of Saber, I think you had talked a couple of weeks ago. Don't they have some kind of a conference or something that they do every
weekend
year?
In Phoenix.
Oh, it's this weekend?
Okay. This past weekend. Not this weekend, last weekend.
Okay.
They put out a newsletter every Friday, and the one that they put out yesterday, they email it to everybody. The one they put out yesterday, put a lot of the detail out there. Not, they said who presented what. And when the week before, when they printed the list of the presentations, I told people that there's not one that I would last more than 5 minutes.
Well, now, Alan, do you still go to any Saber meetings? I mean, were you a member of like New York?
I've been a member since 74.
Right.
I've been to 31 nationals. I went to every one between 1984, I had to miss 83 because of a work situation, and 2011 except for one. That was in Seattle. I just didn't want to go out there that far.
Right.
I went and I had 2 back surgeries in 2012, so I couldn't go to that one. Then I went to the one in Philadelphia in 2013, and I had a situation where I was in the hospital for 4 months in 2014, and I used walkers to get around. So I missed when they had the next one I went to. I missed 14, 15, and 16. 17 was here in New York, and I was able to go to that. And I got a ride to go back and forth to go to Pittsburgh last year, which is one I didn't want to miss. So I got rides back and forth, and I went to that, which I enjoyed thoroughly. I can't go to the ball games that they associate with the convention, so I use that time to rekindle my energy. But this year it's out in San Diego, and there's no way I can make that.
Right.
It's too much of a thing. The 2020, as far as I know, is supposed to be in Baltimore, so if the health holds up, I'll probably be there. But going out to the West Coast is too much for me. After my first back surgery in 2010, I went to Atlanta, which was fairly easy, and then I made the mistake in 2011 going out to Long Beach, California.
Right.
And that's what caused me to have the second and third operations.
Well, Alan, with the back operations, obviously that certainly limits you. But what about the local chapter meetings? Do you go to any of those?
I went for the locals for years and years and years. I used to do obits on either Hall of Famers or players that had a big impact in New York baseball. But the last few years, they have this thing called Sabre Day now. It's in January. It's the week between the football conference championships and the Super Bowl.
Right. They
charge $35 here for a meeting that lasts from 10 to 3. And
now, is that? Do they have that? Because they didn't have it when I was the executive director. But do they have that in all the Sabre chapters? I mean,
yeah, most of the Sabre chapters. When you're out,
right.
And I'm very good friends with Evelyn Begley, who runs the local here.
New York,
and,
yeah, I know Evelyn. I know Evelyn quite well.
I've told her 1,000,000 times. I said, it's in Phoenix because it's 80 degrees out there. Here it's not. And to get a ride or to take a car service, because I can't get a ride generally on that day, it would cost me at best $100.
Right.
Just to get back and forth. Plus you get that, plus you get the $35. It becomes it's too much money.
Right.
And I just, in the time of year, I told her, I said, you don't have to listen to them and schedule it in January when it's 25 degrees here and 80 degrees
right.
out in Phoenix.
Right.
And so there are chapters, because I know this from the newsletters that they put out, that decide the heck with this. We're going to do it later in March, maybe, when the weather starts to improve.
Right.
But so I think that I'm not, and voting in elections for officers in Sabre, like the president, it's like voting for Joseph Stalin in the old Soviet Union, because there's only one candidate.
Yeah. Well, you know what, Alan, you bring about a lot of memories for me, because when I was executive director of Sabre, I mean, I had known about Sabre, but they sort of came after me and my background, that kind of thing. But I was never really into the analytic part of it. I was into more of the history, and I was asked to speak at various Sabre chapter meetings around the country, which I really enjoyed. But my goal was to try to get SABR to become more of a nationally known organization. I had mentioned a couple of weeks ago, Ted Williams used to say, SABR is the best kept secret in baseball, and I was trying to get more members. And I don't know what the membership is now, but I just felt that with all the knowledge and all the interest in baseball, that SABR could have done a lot more to really promote the organization. Now, maybe intentionally they didn't want to do it. They wanted to keep it small. I don't know. But I just felt that the current membership number is about the same as it's been for the last 10 or 15 years.
About 6,000, 7,000 as far as I know.
Right.
But the thing is, the average age is 60. And people like, what the average age? One time, several years ago, they sent a journal for me, a baseball research journal, for me to edit. And the historical stuff was a breeze.
Right.
Okay. And one they had to get rid of because there's a thing on managers' wins, and the article itself was a couple of years old, and all the numbers had changed. But anytime they put out these mathematical things, I sent it back with the historical stuff all done. I said, I can't do the math. I said, I was lucky I was able to get through this stuff in high school.
Right.
So I said, I can't do these formulas and all this other nonsense. And frankly, I wasn't interested. I mean, the new numbers, the only thing that makes sense to me, a couple make sense to me. WHIP, which is walks and hits per innings for a pitcher,
right,
and the on base plus slugging for a position player. The rest of it, forget. And to me, fielding, a lot of fielding, which they try to quantify, is determined by the kind of pitches you have.
Right. Now, Alan, is the whole term, when they call it sabermetrics, I mean, they talk about it with Bill James. I mean, was Bill James a SABR member? I mean, is that just
I think he is. But the thing is that I feel that was very unfortunate, because when you tell people you're in SABR, a lot of people who don't know any better, they think that you're into all this analytical stuff. Because,
right.
And I have to explain to them. I have to do this quite a number of times on Facebook, and even though it says sabermetrics, don't apply that to me because I'm not into that stuff.
Right.
And
Alan, whoever came up with, do you know whoever came up with it? I know they spell it differently, but what does sabermetrics have anything to do with SABR? I mean, how did the name?
Bill James was the first big progenitor of this stuff.
Okay.
And he was in SABR at the time, and they just gave it the name, which I think is extremely unfortunate. Now, I'm lucky. I have basically a photographical memory. I've had since I was a kid.
Oh, you do? It's amazing what you know.
And places and all the stuff. I'm a big buff on all sorts of history, too, and movies, anything that has names and things like that. But I still can maintain most of it, even though I'm going to be 76 in 2 months. And I practice myself. I practice on certain things just to keep it going. And I won a whole bunch of trivia contests there. I played from 1987 through 1999. I was on 5 teams that won, and then I decided to play individual. I won the 2 individuals I played, and then I retired. And it's funny because, as I've mentioned a number of times, I can tell you what happened in 1955 and 1965. I can't tell you what happened last year.
Well, I think, Alan, I mean, you and I are, and I think a lot of people, you and I are about the same age, but you start to do that. But to have that photographic memory of yours is a real gift. Now, were you born with it? I mean, did you know from a very early age that you had it? Yeah,
because basically when I was in grade school, they put me in front of the higher grades to recite the president's lists and all this sort of stuff. But in those days, there were no real programs in schools. I mean, I did junior high in 2 years instead of 3, but there was no real problems. There was no real programs for the way they have it now, which might have made a whole difference, in my life, but it just wasn't there then. But I knew that, and I was sitting with a guy named Bob Tiemann at one of the conferences a number of years ago, and he says to me that he's the only one in this whole place that could name all the vice presidents. So I said to him, "How much do you want to bet?" And he threw some questions at me. I nailed them, and that was
right.
Yeah. But
Alan? What about when you were at Pitt? I mean, did you have all kinds of special courses or whatever?
No,
I you're a college student.
I majored in history and poli-sci, anything that required paper writing.
Right.
I tried calculus for about a week. I said, no, I can't deal with this.
Right. Okay.
And I dropped out.
That sounds like me. I majored in history and political science as well, and I just stayed totally away from math if I could. So
yeah, it was as I said, when I was in high school and they started doing algebra and plane geometry and trigonometry, I said, what good is this stuff? So we have in New York, we have in high school they have Regents exams.
Right.
In the subject, you have to take a test at the end of the year. So I was able to get the stuff together and get through the test. And then once the test was over, it was almost like a computer. I'd wipe it out because I didn't need it anymore.
Okay, so then, in other words, is your photographic memory when it comes to baseball, because you really are, I mean, you're amazing, the stuff that you can pull out, but is that all coming from, like you would read it one time as a kid and then it would be in your memory?
Yeah, and basically the stuff in the 50s and 60s and maybe 70s and late 40s, I just, have as much as I can. I recite things. When I was in the recuperating after I came home from the back surgeries, what I did was I took the 52 top set and I memorized the whole 407 numbers. But wow. I haven't done that with any other set because I just don't feel the need for it. But I just have the ability to read and talk and recall. It's like when the first time I found out that Mickey Vernon did a stint with Cleveland, because everything I had on him was from Washington, all cards.
Right.
I found out that, I was looking at early Wynn and looking at because Wynn always said that he never knew how to really pitch until he got to Cleveland with Mel Harder. So all of a sudden I'm looking at, and I had that first Turk and Thompson Encyclopedia, which my parents gave me for my 9th birthday. And, so I was looking at that, and and all I had for the hitters was number of games played in batting average. They didn't have anything like they do now. And so then I found that Mickey Vernon went to Cleveland for 1949. He was sent back to Washington in 1950 for one of the worst pitchers in Major League history, a play by the name of Dick Weik, W-I-E-I-K. Look him up if you get a chance. The guy was terrible. Yeah,
that's a name I'm not familiar with. Obviously, I knew about Mickey in Cleveland. But
he was he had absolutely no control, none. And the reason they sent Mickey back to Washington is because Luke Easter had taken over at first base.
Right.
So,
and Mickey, Griffith Stadium was made for a hitter like Mickey because he'd line drive hitter, and he used to dent the right field wall constantly because that's what he was. He wasn't a guy who really put a lot of loft on his home runs. I mean, he was a line drive hitter. So, but I knew that Mickey was because Mickey and I, as we've talked before, we're very close friends, and I know he did spend that 1 year in Cleveland, and in our DVD, we actually have footage that Mickey took when he was out in spring training with Larry Doby and Joe Gordon and Keller and those guys who were playing, Feller and those guys who were playing for the Indians, and Mickey was part of that. So I appreciate what you said about Mickey, and as I mentioned to you earlier, Mickey was really fortunate to be with Pirates in '60, and you happened to see that game, that seventh game of the World Series. It had to be an amazing thrill for you as a youngster to see that happen.
Me and my friend went absolutely nuts. And I bought a World Series program on the way out for 50 cents, which I still have. But the thing is, the first time I really became aware of Mickey, he did make a couple of appearances at the Philadelphia Regionals, where I went to for a number of years.
Right, okay.
That was always like the second week of May, and he did make a couple of appearances there. And the first time I really became aware of him was in the 1953 batting race when Al Rosen was trying to win the Triple Crown.
Yes. That's true, very true. And matter of fact, there's a book. It's called Mickey Vernon, the Gentleman First Baseman.
I have
Al
that,
Rosen, Al Rosen wrote the foreword, and in that, the end of it, it says, "I just wish Mickey had gone 1 for 4 instead of 2 for 3 or whatever to win the batting title by, I think it was 1 percentage point."
Yeah, because Rosen had the home run and the RBI.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
But
well, it's amazing, Alan. Your memories and are incredible, and I know that part of the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network is having you on in various shows, and I always enjoy talking to you because we have a lot in common with our love of baseball. You and I have known some of the same people, and it's been great, and I appreciate you talking to me today about it.
I appreciate all the.
We spent almost an hour, Alan, and I could have spent many hours talking to you about it because it's a lot of fun for me. So I
appreciate all the emails you send me after the podcast that we do together.
Well, hey, I appreciate it, Alan, and I'll talk to you again probably next week. We'll be on at some point and talking about baseball history. So. And Ralph Tyka has been great for me. He asked me a couple of years ago, he said, would you mind, doing some of these? And I said no. And so then he wanted to do what he calls one-on-one, and that's where you are. And I appreciate you talking to me about baseball, Alan, and I wish you well, and we'll talk again.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing before I go.
Yep.
I want to thank you for this opportunity, and David Nemec and I have done a series of baseball podcasts on this network. Basically, we're doing this series now on all decade teams. We finished the 40s, and next time we're going to be doing the 50s. We did franchises. We did a whole bunch of these things. So you'll probably find them pretty interesting.
Absolutely.
I just want to refer you to
definitely listen because, the 40s and 50s, just like you, I mean, that's where I was growing up. And, part of baseball for me was just everyday life. I didn't even think about it too much till I got older. And then when my dad was with the expansion senators in the 60s, and I said, geez, I really would like to be involved in studying more about the game. And all of a sudden, the last couple of years, and Sabre came along before that, and it's been a lot of fun for me. And to be with people like yourself with all that knowledge, it's wonderful. So
we also did a series. We also did a series that's out there on the evolution of rules.
Great.
Which people might be interested.
I hope the evolution of rules stops with all this craziness they're talking about. This putting a runner on second base with a tie score. I mean, I said, I hope that never happens. But now I saw where they're talking about maybe using it for the All-Star game.
What do you think about the three batter rule that they're going to impose next year?
I can, if they want to do it, it's fine. But there are other things that they could do. I'd be happier if they would take the DH and just throw it in the garbage. But I think what's going to happen, it's going to wind up.
The Union will never let that happen.
Yep, I know. I agree. It's going to go in the National League. The Players Union is too much. It's too strong. And unfortunately, once they open the door with the DH, as far as I'm concerned, it's like Pandora's box. You're not going to put it back in. And, the game itself, to me, when I was a kid growing up and what you and talking about, it was, 9 guys. That was it. Pitcher would get up and he's supposed to hit. If he can't hit, he's got to move runners. Today I watch him, guys are swinging for home runs. They're, 2 strikes, not protecting the plate. the games are lasting 4 hours, 5 hours with all the pitching changes and all that kind of stuff. So that's what sort of drives me crazy about the current game.
Yeah, me too. It's very tough to watch at times.
Right. Okay.
Okay,
Alan,
I really
appreciate
this opportunity, and I want to thank you very much for having me.
Hey, my pleasure, Alan. Thank you.
Okay, you take care. We'll probably speak Tuesday
Okay, bye-bye
night.
now.
Bye-bye.
The proceeding was a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production. Thank you for listening.